This is Family Electric Ghost, and we're live on air with Giuliano Grimaudo, and you're a podcaster and author. Welcome to the Family Electric Ghost podcast. How you doing this morning?
Phantom, thanks so much for having me, man. Yeah, I'm doing great. Appreciate you asking. How about you?
Well, I'm doing okay. My cat passed away 2 days ago, so
Oh
the whole
no,
family's been kind of freaked out about it because we're used to her energy being in the house, and it's not around. But
that's so sad. I actually have two cats, and one of them
yeah,
was just sitting here meowing out there. It's just so
yeah,
funny because I was annoyed by it, and now I'm like, well, no, I'm not annoyed at all. Because if he wasn't
yeah.
around, I'd be pretty sad.
Yeah, but yeah, we're going through it. But I want to thank you for being on the Family Like Goes podcast.
Sure.
And before we get into your heart of your story, we always ask every guest a couple questions.
Okay.
What motivates you, and why do you do what you do?
Okay. Good questions. So what motivates me, man? This I feel like there's so many layers to it, but what I'll say if I had to like sum it up to one thing, it would be potential.
Mhm.
When I look at like when I think about my life and when I think about other people's lives, I feel like when I see a person, that's like what I look for is like the potential in that person. For a long time, I felt like I wasn't living up to my potential, and I feel like my potential is even greater than what I'm living up to now. But I think for a long time, I felt like it was being suppressed. My potential was being suppressed by others, and so it's really important to me for people to recognize like what their strengths are and to like tap into those strengths and lean into them
Mhm.
and reach their potential. So for me, like that's like my personal thing. Like I want to reach my potential, but I also love like helping other people do that as well.
Yeah,
You know,
pay it
that's definitely
forward.
something. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, exactly.
that's the
Exactly.
thing. Like if you're a producer or you're like in music, like you end up being like a teacher.
Mm,
Like when you're working with other artists and you're in like the producer hat,
yeah.
your job is to like bring that potential of that artist to the forefront.
Yes.
And in my set, there's certain producers that just like, oh, they just like use their own style and force it on the artist.
Mm,
If the artist is insecure, they'll kind of go that way. And there
yeah.
are other producers that will look at that. I want to find the essence of this artist and bring it
Mm,
out. And I'm not necessarily making them sound like me.
yes. You're just
I'm,
trying to
I'm
find that thing in them and then amplify it.
Yeah, it's like a good editor, they find a journalist and the editor, they find they don't like want to rewrite the whole thing. They just want to present it in a way that really gets people hooked into the story.
Yeah.
People understanding what it really means is like just being able to allow you to communicate or allow you to be you.
Yeah. No,
And
I
I
love
like
that.
the best version of yourself. And I think a lot of life coaches, the mentors, that's what they do.
Yeah, sure.
When you do it the right way.
Sure. Yeah. That's like, yeah, no, I love that you said that because, um, yeah, I don't know, man. I think it's really common for a lot of us to downplay our strengths and sometimes not even like be aware of what our strengths are. And so like I love having conversations with people and seeing like the things in them like that maybe they are even embarrassed of. Like I feel like
Mhm.
there's things that people I actually I had this friend one time who she talked so much, but I used to love hearing her talk so much. Like genuinely, I loved it.
Like yours.
And I
Yeah.
remember her telling me that like when she was younger, that like her dad used to tell her, "You talk too much, shut up."
Mhm.
And I remember she was talking about it and she was crying. And so she always was like questioning if she was talking too much. And I was like, okay, I have to tell you something because before you even said this, like I'm sitting here, like every time you talk, I'm like, I love hearing you talk.
Yeah.
Like you talk so much and it's amazing. And like that was like a mindset shift for her because it was like, wait, I thought this was like a flaw
Yeah, yeah.
that I
Your
had. But
flaws
to me,
sometimes
yes,
is
yes,
is
exactly.
your asset,
Exactly, exactly, and I think a lot of people don't realize that. I think a lot of people do that, like, they beat themselves up over things that they think are their flaws, when in reality, if they were to, like, embrace that thing and lean into it and, like, become a master in that thing, like, it could be, like, the thing that sets them apart from everyone else and allows them to reach their potential, make an impact in the world.
Yeah, I think I always think about Bob Dylan, right? Because his
Mm.
voice
Oh,
what
that's a good
was
one.
to some people was his flaw, but that to me, that's his
Yeah,
asset.
yeah.
Because when he leaned into it and decided, like, "I don't have perfect pitch. I'm not Frank Sinatra. I'm not Nat King Cole. I don't have that,"
Yeah.
right? But he found a way to lean into that nasal sound, lean
Yes.
into, and he has like multiple versions of his voice, and people say he can't sing,
Mm,
but he creates characters,
sure.
and it's very uniquely, it's him. There's nobody
Yeah.
else, right?
Yeah,
And
it's so
like
true.
he actually gave a permission structure for the singer songwriter in the late
Really?
60s. Yeah, we could allow a lot of singer songwriters that were very unique always kind of quote like Dylan showed me the way. That
Oh.
Lou Reed, Bowie. I mean, tons of songwriters and people who had very unique voices that
Mm,
normally probably wouldn't have got pushed through. I mean, the whole punk aesthetic, a lot of them will lean on Dylan and
mm.
say like, yeah, because you don't have to have pitch, perfect pitch. You have to have something to say.
Ah, I
If you
love
have
that.
something to say, then you
Yes.
can say it, and you don't have to compare yourself. The comparison trap that I think a lot of
Yes.
people do, and it's like, oh, it's music. It's like no, it's like the same thing that's in the creative space applies to you, like in your everyday life.
Yeah.
Like when you give yourself the permission to raise your hand, you're scared that everybody's gonna tear you up because your answer is the wrong answer. It's like, well, there's no bad, question, and like you need to learn, and you don't learn by keeping your mind shut and your mouth shut,
Yeah,
your
yeah.
ears
Well,
shut.
see, look, man, I have this whole thing about school that I don't like. Growing up, I did really well in school, but when I look back at school, there's so many things about the experience that I'm just like, man, I really don't like the way that's set up. And
Mhm.
this is one of the reasons is because I feel like they try to put you into like a specific box. It's like the
Yeah,
goal is to get you to fall in line when in reality, like the people that succeed in life, meaning reach their potential, make an impact, that type of success. Those people are the people that are like embracing the things that make themselves unique, not falling in line.
yeah, because everybody wants to do STEM, and that's great, And
Yeah.
I'm in my day job, I'm a software guy, so I understand
Mm.
that. But also I'm an artist,
Yeah.
so I lean into left right brain, right?
Yeah.
And people will say, I mean, I've been in Fortune 500 companies. I'm working with startups now, but the
Mm.
idea was, oh, you want creative people, but then you put everybody in a box, right? You say you want that type of person that would be like an Einstein, would be a Nikola Tesla, but those people didn't actually
Mm.
test well,
Yeah.
right? So your performance review structure dissuades people like that
Yep.
from being in the organization. Your
Yep.
idea that they have to work 9 to 5, that dissuades people who actually you're saying you want that, but you really
Mm.
don't because you're not open enough. You're so into bureaucracy and structure
Yes.
and all the decorum. It's like, what does that matter? Like people who are on the
Yeah.
kind of bleeding edge of the bell curve, they don't fit in that
Mm.
middle space, and that middle
Yeah.
space is very deadening to me to the
Sure.
act of creativity.
Oh, I totally agree with that, man. Look, I've had a couple. I mean, because I'm kind of just like you. I don't have it hanging up, but I used to have my guitar hanging up behind me, and like I'm a musician as well. But I also like I do stuff with like marketing and advertising, and I've been in like corporate situations, and it's just yeah, no, I don't like it. Right? Like
The
like
structure.
you said, it's like everything gets put into like this very specific little box, and that's just like yeah, I don't know. I can't live that way.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I end up going with a startup mindset because in a startup,
Mm,
it's entrepreneurial, and I get to wear different hats. Like one day
so true.
I'm an architect, one day I'm a QA analyst, the next day I might be a business analyst, I might be a
Mm,
sales, you know, evangelist. It depends on what
yeah.
they need, right? Because so when you're a
Yeah.
very creative person, you can wear all those hats,
Yeah. So true.
and you can kind of ramp up to what's needed. I mean, I worked in Japan for 2 years
Mm,
in a division of a company, an insurance company that wanted to kind of be entrepreneurs. So they went and opened an office in Tokyo. Everybody there had to put on multiple hats and then understand the difference between Japanese business culture and American business culture.
interesting.
And even in that situation, the American office was always trying to dictate things that didn't make sense for the Japanese market. In the
Mm,
Japanese market, if you made a mistake, companies would open up, have a like an auditorium and apologize to the customer for the error.
interesting.
And Americans couldn't
Interesting.
get that. They were like, "Why would they do that?" I said, "Well, you're not in Japan. So
Huh.
you don't understand the market. You don't understand the customers. Like
Yeah.
when we tell you as a somebody that's there as an expat, and we see what's on the ground, you need to listen to your people on the ground instead of saying, "Oh, this is what we do in Connecticut. This is what we do in New York City." So
This is the
what? This
policy.
is Tokyo.
You're like, this is not.
This is not New York.
Yeah, exactly. Interesting.
But yeah,
Man, we went on a huge tangent there.
yeah.
I was like,
But yeah,
how do we land here? So
yeah,
funny.
it's people struggle, to get out of their loops. I think that kind of goes to your idea of like habits
Yeah.
and in loops. People can get into a bad loop.
Mm,
How do you get out of that bad loop?
for sure. That's a good point. Yeah. But yeah, we could talk about it. Let's talk
Yeah,
about
yeah.
it. I recently released my book called Habit Hacks, which I've got right here. And one of the things so it's funny you say that, because like the biggest angle in the book is on building new habits. But there is one chapter where I do talk about like bad habits. You said about getting in a bad habit loop. But I really do think like the book that I've written is necessary. And I
Mhm.
say that because there's so much information about habits that I think sometimes like, okay, like what are we doing here? Like, are we just rehashing the same stuff? Um, but I think that like there's two angles to this. First of all, I think there's the angle of like willpower, discipline, and for me, I've never been that type of person where it's just like,
Mhm.
oh, I'm just going to use my willpower and I'm going to be so disciplined to do all these things that I want to do. Like that just has never been me. I feel like there's a lot of guys who, and I don't know how to describe this, but I
Mhm.
know that there's a lot of guys that for some reason they just like love pain.
Yeah.
Like when they go to the gym, they're like, "Oh my god, I love
Yeah,
it.
you
It
get to see
hurts
the
so
burn. You gotta
much."
be in the burn. You're like,
Yeah, bro.
"Oh."
I'm like, dude, I don't want to do anything. I think I might die, right? Like I don't want to do this stuff. I'm like, I'm gonna die and I don't want to do this ever again. And then I think on the flip side of things, right? You have those guys who like just really enjoy doing hard stuff. And then on the flip side, you have a lot of information about habits that, in my opinion, is just, I don't know what the word is. Maybe it's like conflated. Like it's
Mhm.
just, there's a lot of like science, and it's
Mhm.
kind of like, oh, well, this, cue, routine, reward. And I'm not saying that those things are wrong or don't exist, but I just feel like it's unnecessary information. Like most people don't like, I compare it to like if you're going to cook, like if you're going to cook pasta
Yeah.
on the box, it just says boil a pot of water.
Yeah.
Like that's all it says, right? It doesn't tell you this is how it works when you use a heat source and then you find water and you put it into the pot. Like this is how heat transfers. You're like, no, bro, it just says
You
boil a
don't need
pot of water.
yeah,
Boil a pot of water.
you don't need the physics. You don't need to go into a physics lesson.
Exactly. So for me, like if anyone reads my book, it's literally like 80 pages. It's super short. Okay. And to me, like I kind of viewed it as like if I could go back like maybe like 7 or 8 years to like
Mhm.
me when I was just like struggling to like do what I said I wanted to do, right? Like when I was trying to implement new habits. Like this is the book I would want
But it's
handed
like
to
a
me.
cheat sheet, like
Exactly.
in my business in IT, like, I started back in the mainframe era, and those things were so complicated. You had to have like cheat sheets
Mm.
for all the 3270 screens, for all the
Yeah.
things you don't want to read. They'd have like 100-page manual of
Uh,
what you're supposed to do. But if we would, the operator would have to say, well, what's really the bottom line of what I really need
interesting.
to know? And you'd have like a cheat sheet or like
Yeah.
10 things, 20 things you needed to know.
Yeah, that's okay. I love that you said that because that's exactly it. And that's that's okay. I love that you said that. That's exactly like what I had in mind when I wrote the book. Okay, so I have it broken up into 3 parts. But again, this book is 80 pages, okay? The 3 parts, for part 1 is basically just like a chapter. Part 3 is basically just a chapter, and part 2 is all of the hacks.
Mm.
So essentially, the idea is you sit down in one sitting, read through this book so you understand it. And then in the future, whenever you want to implement a new habit, you just go and be like, okay, which of these hacks works for me? Right. And because you remember, you went through the book, you go, okay, oh, yeah, that hack, that hack.
Yeah, yeah. You
And
kind of
I've got
need
the
that
list of hacks there. Yeah. Yeah.
reinforcement. Like when you go to college, you're taking that, you're taking notes from the lecture, but you're really looking for like, what are the
Mm,
action items here? What are the things I really needed to understand that's going to help me pass the midterm or pass the
exactly.
quiz, right? So
Exactly.
like, there's a lot of information that was given, but what's the bottom line?
Yes.
Like
See,
what's
and
what's the
this is the
conclusion?
thing. Like I love books like Atomic Habits and like just there's plenty of books out there, okay, about habits. And I love all of them. And I think that a lot of them have like great storytelling in them as well. Like I just wanted to create something that was like no nonsense. Like literally just here you go. one sitting, this is everything you need to know. And I really do believe that, like, even if you struggled with like building habits before, like if you just sit down and read this book, like it will literally
Yeah.
change your life.
Well, I think today with everybody's attention span, 'cause we live in this age where like
Mm,
15-second, 30-second clips,
yes.
and people want to get the cliff notes to everything. Um, and that's the way it is.
Yeah.
That's the mindset because we got I was a child of the '70s. We
Mm.
had 4 TV channels. Didn't have satellite radio, no internet. You wanted to
Yeah.
find something, you had to go to the library, use Dewey Decimal System to go find it, right? So
Uh,
so like I kind of know that world and then
yeah.
see this world.
Yeah.
And I'm being a musician, like people don't have the patience to even listen to an entire album. I was a kid that
Mm.
grew up on vinyl, so I
Yeah.
would actually listen to the whole thing.
Yeah. Front
So
to
I
back.
still have the mindset why I like that, whereas
Yeah.
I realize there's a lot of people that don't like that. They want the playlist. They don't go
Sure.
deep into a person. So you have to. How do you get to that person?
Yeah.
How do you actually, get that person to get the hook to stay in a novel, to stay in a book, to stay in a movie,
Mm.
to stay in a podcast, to stay wherever? How do you get
Yeah.
them to do that?
Yeah. It's so funny too. Like, see, this is my perspective on habits. Okay. Like, habits to me feels like a foundational thing that like everyone should just get and then like move on with their life. That's why this is why like I don't think you need to like okay, there's so many like literally if you just Google like
Yeah.
book on habits, right? There's so many like books out there about habits. For me, I'm just like we don't need to be talking about this forever. Like this is literally something you can just like read the book one time, get it, and then like be equipped going forward to just live your life because it feels like just a base foundational part of my life now. Whereas
Mhm.
before it was like a struggle, right? It was like, how do I get myself to do these things that I'm trying to do, right? And I would beat myself up because I couldn't stick with stuff and all of those things.
Mhm.
And then now I'm just like, oh, this is just a part of my life. And it's not the part. But that's the thing is before you get to that point, it feels like it's everything. Right.
Yeah.
When you're trying to get yourself to go to the gym, you're trying to get yourself to eat better or whatever it might be. And you're beating yourself up because you don't have discipline and all these things. And it's like, dude, you don't understand. There's literally an entire life on the other side of this. And if you just like understand that it's actually simple
Well,
and
it
you
becomes
get
like
just like the
muscle
simple
memory.
stuff.
Yeah, I think
Yes.
it's the idea, like
Yes.
if you're a podcaster and you've done 100 episodes, 500 to 1,000, once you've done like that certain number, that it becomes like rote because like it's
Mm,
muscle memory. It's
yes.
not that you're phoning it in. It's like there's a comfort level. Like musicians know it, and
Yeah.
athletes know it. The guy they can do the 3-point shot. There was a lot of work
Mm,
to be able to do that in the clutch and actually
yes.
hit it like 80-90% of the time
Yeah.
because then you don't have to like obsess about it or have anxiety. Am
Exactly.
I going to hit it? Like, well, you just do it and you hit it. And
Yeah.
if you
See,
say there,
this is my perspective on it. It actually is to me is like riding a bike. Because before you can ride a bike, it seems like it's this hard thing. And when you're trying to learn how to ride a bike, it's hard, right? And it's
Mhm.
like, oh man, you're struggling. I don't think I'm ever going to get this. And once you get it, then you can ride a bike to other places, right?
Yeah,
Like that's the whole point. Is like you then use the bike to do other things. You
yeah,
don't care about riding how to ride the bike anymore. It's just part of you. And that's what I feel like I'm doing with this book. I'm just like here, just ride the bike and go do the thing you need to do with your life.
yeah. 'Cause I
Right. When
mean,
I'm talking before about reaching your potential, like I think people not being able to implement habits is part of what prevents them from getting there. And so I'm
yeah,
like, look, dude, learn how to ride the bike and move on with your life. Go do what you were meant to do. You know what I mean?
yeah. I mean, I'm a mountain biker, and I grew up, on the 1970s, like Schwinn Phantom,
Yeah.
trying to jump ramps like like Evil Knievel. But like, that's a thing in the '70s. We didn't wear helmets.
Yeah, no.
We didn't have nothing. We were just putting bricks and putting like plywood down,
So
jumping ramps.
funny.
It's like, oh, we're trying to jump the canyon like evil. That's what we were trying. We all
Jump
kind of think
again.
like that. And then later,
Yeah.
we got into mountain bikes, and it's like, whoa, they're coming down Mount Snow or something. Well, I
Mm.
guess I need a helmet or I might die. Could I might hit a tree or something? But like they going from being able to ride that Schwinn to be able to ride a full mountain bike at 50 miles an
Mm.
hour down a mountain road.
Sure.
It's a different skill set, and you had to
Yeah.
ramp up, but you
Yeah.
had to get, at that beginning and like not care about skinning your knees
Mm.
until you got it. And
Sure.
then once you had it, there's a different level you could get to.
Sure. Sure.
And you could be like that, Olympic bike cyclist, or you could be the
Hmm.
guy riding down a mountain bike, or you just be a guy who's happy in the park. But there's different levels, but you have to get past that first level,
Yeah, that like foundational.
foundational thing,
Yeah,
and then you realize it opens up to so many other things
absolutely.
that you could
Absolutely.
get to. And yeah, everybody thinks it's so hard. Like I talk to authors all the time. It's like how am I gonna get this book done? And it's like, the ones who actually keep on writing, they have trilogies and multiple books running at the same time. It was like once they got past that blockage
Mm,
and they opened up their head, so it's like, oh, I can let something come through.
yeah.
And I can be willing to like let that muse come in and process and then realize what I have and what's coming from the outside. They like a lot of artists is like they can figure out how to channel, and then they don't get a lot of blocks. They
Mm.
actually tend to like I have to turn it off. I have to walk away because like I've talked to a lot of artistic people. It's like it's not about the block. It's about what they don't do, what they don't work on, because there's so much stuff coming in. They have like a discernment of like what should I focus on because I have all this stuff
Interesting.
coming, and I got to shut it off sometimes because there's too much coming in.
Yeah. I'm curious of because you're a musician as well. I feel like when I was, so I haven't like, I don't play a lot of music anymore. I do every once in a while, but when I was younger, I used to a lot. And I wrote some songs and I always felt like when I was writing the songs, um, I almost felt like I was like discovering the song. Like as I was writing it, it was like, how can I describe it? It's not like it was coming to me like in a vision. All I mean is that like as I was writing it and like coming up with stuff, it was almost as if I was just like discovering that melody, that
Yeah,
tune,
yeah. Sometimes
etc.
it just happens in a moment. Like I have a lot of people today. They work in this digital space, but like I said, I'm a child of the '70s,
Mm,
so I just rather just sit at my piano or sit at my synthesizer,
mm,
roll the tape, and just go. And it's a different mindset. It's kind of like this idea of like a modal jazz or experimental music, or just like Neil Young was famous for doing that with the Crazy Horse. They would just be in the studio and just roll the tape, and they used to have hours of tape
mm,
of stuff, and then they go back and say, "Here's the song." Like 2
mm.
hours in, this little section here, this is the song, and then they go
That's
back and work on it.
interesting.
Yeah, Zappa used to do the same thing with the Mothers of Invention. He just
Wow, I
used to
didn't know
tape
that.
he used to tape the band at rehearsals live, tape stuff he was doing by himself, and they would go into his living room with some of the guys in the band. They would listen to the tapes and say, "Hey, where is it?" It's like, "That's the song." And then they would
Wow.
work on it. And sometimes it's this putting this like material out there as this archive of things that
Wow.
you don't know what's going to work together.
Yeah.
I find a lot of artists is like it's not always sequential. Sometimes they're popping things from
Mm.
different time periods, different journals, different sources, and then kind of like a collage effort. It's a different like once you get to a certain level, this collage type of mindset in creativity tends to be super productive.
That's super interesting. I've never heard that before of like someone like recording like an hour worth of stuff and then like
Bouncing
piecing
around.
through it and like, yeah, that's super interesting. Super
Yeah,
interesting.
it's just a different way of doing things because like a lot of people think everything's linear,
Mm,
and sometimes it's not.
yeah,
And then you can see things that because probably if you go linear or sequential, you get kind of pigeonholed, you get stuck.
sure.
That's where a lot of people like give up because like, oh, it's not working.
Mm,
But if you have a wider palette, a wider frame, then you can say, oh, this is where this is the bridge, this is the
mm,
melody, this is this, or this is the hook, or this is the actual
yeah.
real story.
Yeah. It's so
You know,
funny. So, because I know obviously I came on here to talk about my book about habits, but I have my own podcast called How to Be a Person. And I love talking about stuff like this. And one of the things that like I talk about a lot is experimenting. So for me, I've always like I've gotten to a point where I just now I don't put a label on anything. Like I like yes, I can say like in certain situations I'm an author or a speaker or a podcaster, but like for me, I don't like apply any of those labels as like what I am. And the
hmm
reason is because in my whole life, like now if I had to put a label, I'd be like I'm a scientist of life because now I literally like I just try all of these different things.
experimentation. Yeah,
Yes, and it's funny because it reminds me of what you just said, like where they would just go and like for like an hour and just do play whatever, and then they would discover it within there, and that's how it is. Like I think, see again, this is another thing about school, right? Like you go to school and they're like, okay, pick what your major is going to be, like pick what you're going to do for the rest of your life, and I'm like, that's insane. Like,
It's
to
very
me, that's
yeah,
completely insane.
it's too hyper focused, and I think that's why people end up not being happy.
Yes, exactly. Because this is like, in my opinion, I believe like if there's any sort of like blanket purpose to life, it's just to experience it. And like what ends up happening is you pick one job, you pick one house, you pick right all of these things one, and then you just live that same life over and over again. That same day, you just continue to repeat it forever. And it's like that is not the point.
But then
Like
you
the
start
point is to
phoning
have
it in.
experiences.
Yeah, you start phoning it in, you don't feel it's like, yeah, maybe you get comfortable with the paycheck,
Mm,
but you're not satisfied with what you're doing. And
mm-hmm.
I've run to tons of people I mean, I run into like doctors, lawyers. I mean, they spent their life to get that degree, to get that certificate,
Yes.
and then they are like, oh, I'm not happy. And then they pivot, and then they
Yeah.
end up becoming like, like a TEDx talker,
Right? Like they'll
speaker.
pivot to something crazy,
So
like
something it's like that's not what they were doing. It's like, but that's what they actually they leaned into that. And he's like, really,
yeah.
I'm kind of like a jack of all trades, and I kind of want to just be out there and talk and get into the like an ideas factory,
Yes.
and
Yes.
know where that's gonna go because it's always kind of wide open. I do a lot of stuff. I call my stuff expansive sound experiments,
Mm,
and people like A&R people used to like, well, what's that? Well, it means I can hit any genre and it doesn't matter.
mm,
And they're like, "Oh no, you gotta tell me what genre it is." I told you it's expansive. That's what it is. That's what you should put out. Because I'm gonna one day I'm doing punk, next day I'm doing jazz, might do classical. I don't know. It's whatever I feel like doing. And
yeah. Yeah.
people don't like that. They want to put you in the lane. They want to pigeonhole you. It's like, well, I can't market that. Well, I'll find a way to get somebody who can.
Well, that's the thing. It's so funny too. It's like I don't care if you market it. Like for like I'm doing this for the sake of the experience.
Yeah.
I'd like personally, I think that's the whole point. Like I think if you live your life and make decisions to do things for the sake of experiencing that thing, it's kind of like how can you not be happy?
Yeah, I think it's like a law of attraction, in my opinion. Like if
Mm,
you do the thing that's off the beaten path, people will recognize it and they'll come toward it. And
mm,
so when you put stuff out in the world that's unexpected, people tend to gravitate toward it. It's like, Steve Jobs, like they was laughing at him when he had Apple put out an iPhone. So how the heck is he going to compete with telecommunication companies?
mm,
That's not
yeah.
his lane. And look what happened.
Yeah.
Like,
Now
that
it's like
wasn't his
the
lane.
number
It's
one
like,
phone.
yeah. And even when he did the iPod, it's like, well, that's not your lane. Your lane is PCs.
Mm,
And he
so
went into
true.
totally different areas, and people were like, "Well, you shouldn't. How can you do that?" Well, that's what happens. Like the people who are willing to push, everybody hates it. Everybody like their first initial response is, "That's terrible. That's
Mm,
no good. That's like where you stay in your lane."
yeah.
And then you kind of
Yeah.
know you're doing the right thing when people tell you like, "Stay in your lane." Like, okay, and I'm doing something right.
It's so true. It's so true. I feel like if I could tell people like listening who like want to do something but they're getting pushback is like that's the thing you should be doing.
Yeah, that's
Right,
when
when
you
you're getting
know.
pushback, like don't listen. Man, dude, I can tell you from my own experience, it is so hard not to listen when you have like a lot of people telling you, well, you really shouldn't do that. And I'm not talking about just with work. I mean like literally anything in your life. There were times where I was making decisions and people were like, man, you really shouldn't do that. Like that's I don't know about that. That's risky, or I don't know about that XYZ for some reason, right? And it is hard not to listen to it. But what I can say is that, like, for me, making decisions that feel right, regardless of whether or not like the people around me are supportive of it or approve of it at all. It's
Mhm.
like that's what leads to living a happy life, you know?
Well, I think a lot of people are geared toward, the input of like, well, fear has a big effect and safety has another effect. And, we kind of go back to a very
Mm,
animal instincts in terms of,
yes.
fight or flight. And, there was a reason why, you didn't get kicked out of the tribe because you didn't want the saber tooth or the wolf to get you. And so you might compromise and not do something, right?
Sure.
Because they're going to kick you out
Yes.
and throw you out into the wilderness, and then you're all by yourself. And then so there's a tendency not to want to be in that pioneering
Yeah.
or kicked out
Absolutely.
mode.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, it's like hardwired in us, and I totally get that. That's why I say, like, I understand how hard it is to not listen to the people around you. But what I can say is that, like, the decisions in my life where people were pushing back on me the most are the ones that led me to, like, the most happiness, like to having the things that I love the most in my life today.
Mhm. Well, it's like there's like sometimes people make things overly complex. I've always been this idea like keep it simple
Mm.
in terms of like 'cause a lot of things like the reason you won't do it because like wow there's like 100 steps to this thing and I can't even get past step two and so I'm done. Right? When you say if you have a mindset where I can have a little win, like I don't got to go 0 to 100.
Yes.
Like if people have that 0 to 100, then it's like well I can't if I don't get it right away. I'm done.
Yeah.
Where it's like the people who stick with it, even though they might, nobody wants to hear you sticking with it when you learn the sacks.
Mm.
Nobody wants to hear you learning this.
They don't want to hear
They
you
want
learning the sax. They want to hear you
to know
after
when
you've
you're at like
learned it.
Coltrane level, then they want to hear you. But up with like all the work that took to get there, they don't want to hear it. They don't want to
Yeah.
see it. They just
Yeah.
want to see the end state. Like, now I get it, but that's when you do the work, you get the result. And so
Yeah.
you got to want to do the work. So you can't be doing it because somebody like it's somebody else's lane and you're trying to copy them.
Mm-hmm.
It's got to speak to you, right? I think that's where when you find the things that speak to you, then you're more likely to stick with it, right?
Oh, totally, totally. See, I love that you mentioned that because it kind of it's very similar to what I talk about in the book about habits, like when it comes to sticking with things. So first of all, like I do believe that the foundation for like habits is identity and like mindset. So a lot of times people go and they're just like, oh, I want to, drink more water, or I want to exercise more, or whatever. And those are great goals to have. But the problem is that if you don't adjust your mindset on it and you don't adjust your identity to match that goal that you want, um, ultimately it's like you're doing something that's not you, right?
Hmm.
And so if you're able to change your mindset around those things, and see, this is the thing, right? So like here's a good example. Like let's say you want to, like let's say right now you don't run, but you want to start running, and you're just talking about it like, oh yeah, I want to start running more. Um, if you don't shift your mindset into the mindset of a runner, or your identity into the identity of a runner, then ultimately you're just going to be doing that thing temporarily. And
Hmm.
so if you really want the change to last, then you have to change your identity. And sometimes it can be hard because people be like, well, but I literally have never run before. How can I just call myself a runner? Well, first of all, you don't need anyone's permission to call yourself a runner. Right? You could literally have never run in your entire life and call yourself a runner and start running. You don't need anyone's permission. But besides that, I can understand how it might take time to shift your identity. And so I think what's really important is just the way that you talk to yourself, right? So you might not be ready to call yourself a runner, but maybe you can say, I'm learning to run, which I feel like everyone knows how to run. But you get what I'm saying, right? Like
Yeah, yeah.
you
That's a
can change
mindset.
your identity a little bit at a time. You don't have to be like, I'm a marathon runner when you've never done anything, right?
Well, it's a
Because
different body type, like a wrestler or a football
yes,
quarterback versus a runner. Like you look at a cyclist body. It's
yeah,
like you have to have it's a different like set of muscles and behavior in terms of the
yes.
sport. In terms of what you're doing, like you need to be in that frame. So you might have to kind of reframe your body, the mindset, your techniques as an athlete. It's different, just because
Mhm.
you're in one sport doesn't mean it's going to apply to this sport.
Mhm. Yeah.
And
Well,
so,
and
yeah.
no, it's okay. I was just gonna say, like what you were saying earlier about like going from 0 to 100 versus just starting small. That's like part of it, right? When it comes to your mindset and the way you identify yourself, you don't have to immediately identify as a runner. You could, but it could start with just a small change. And ultimately, this is one of the things I talk about in the mindset section, because that's part one, is about like the foundational mindset. And I think that is like that is the base of being able to change your behavior, is changing your mindset. And so that the chapter one talks about that. And one of the biggest things I talk about in chapter one, which I think is super important, is this long haul start small idea, which is exactly what you were just saying, right? You
Hmm.
don't have to go 0 to 100. And actually, as a matter of fact, you shouldn't go 0 to 100, right? If you are willing to, like, if you really actually want to change this behavior for the long term, then you have to recognize that like it is a long-term
Yeah.
deal, right? Like this is not something that is just like, okay, well, I need to be at 100% right now. And so I say long haul, start small, because the idea is if you are in it for the long haul, then you have to be willing to start small, because it's just simply proven that like if you make tiny little changes at the beginning and you just keep shifting slowly and
Yeah.
making more and more
Sustainable.
changes, that you will eventually get to where you want to
Yeah.
go.
Sustainable steps,
Exactly.
because if you can see all these fads, right? And it's usually like you can't do that more than like a week, more than 30 days. As soon as you can hit the burnout after 30 days, and you're not going to do it again.
Exactly. And then at the end of it, whatever results you got during that time, you immediately reverse those results. Right. So the idea is that you are slowly changing your behavior over time to match what that person, right, who you're trying to identify as. Like if you want to identify as a runner, you don't your behavior does not just immediately change, and neither does your body, right? Just
Yeah.
like you said, like it's going to take time to get to that point, but that's okay. Right. You have to go into it knowing that, like, okay, I'm in this for the long haul. And because of that, I'm willing to start small, sometimes embarrassingly small. For me, I give the example in the book was when I started running. Okay.
Mhm.
I always hated running. Like I sucked at it. I always was out of breath. Like I didn't understand it. And I was like, I can't do this. I got to a point where I was like, I want to start running every day. And I want to get to the point where I can run a mile every morning,
Mhm.
which for some people is not a lot. There's some people who are like, oh, I run 5 miles every morning. Okay, fine.
Yeah.
For me, it was a big deal, right? Like in
Yeah.
school, like that was like a big thing, right? Like when you were in school, it was like running the mile,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is so funny because as an adult, like a mile, like like actual runners are like a mile is nothing.
Nothing.
But
Yeah.
for me, that was my target, right? I was like, I want to run a mile every single morning. And the way that I did it was I just started ridiculously small, like literally to the point that it felt stupid. So I basically was like, how essentially the idea is like you want it to be so stupid that you're like, I feel more dumb not doing this thing than just doing it because
Yeah.
it's so stupidly small. And so for me, what that was, that would be different for everyone, to be clear. But
Mhm.
for me at the time, it was just being on the treadmill for 30 minutes. Okay.
Mhm.
And I didn't have to run. Like it literally is just be on the treadmill
Be
walking.
on it.
Okay. And to me, that just seemed, it was just so easy. I'm like, there's no way I can just like not do that. Like that's
Can't
just too
fail.
easy.
Hey, do something that's like achievable.
Exactly. But for some people, it might even be smaller, right? It might be just like being in the gym for 20 minutes, right? Like not even being on the machine, right? But I'm just giving that as an
Yeah. Yeah.
example. Everyone's is going to look different. For me, that's what it was. Then I was like, so I was just walking on the treadmill for 30 minutes for a whole week. And then the next week, I was like, okay, what's like the smallest increment I could do this by? And I was like, I could run for 30 seconds of those 30 minutes. And
Mhm.
again, that seems so stupid, right? Like, and I honestly, I was embarrassed. Like I ran for 30 seconds and then I just walked for the rest of the 30 minutes. And I felt stupid, right? I'm like, oh my gosh, people, if someone's looking at me, they're going to be like, this dude just ran for 30 seconds. What does he think he's doing? Like, he's not doing anything. So then I did that for a week. And then for the next week after that, I ran for a minute out of the 30 minutes. And then for the next week, a minute and a half. Next week, 2 minutes. And I did it until I got to the point where I was running for 10 minutes out of the 30 minutes and I was running a 10-minute mile. So I was running a mile every morning. And at that point, it literally wasn't even hard. Like this is what's so funny about it is I remember like when I was in school trying to run the mile, that it was so hard. It was like this big accomplishment. And then here I was eventually just running a mile every single morning like it was nothing. It was no big deal.
Yeah. It's a mindset
And
change in
yeah,
terms
and
of
it was eventually became a habit, right? To the point where when I didn't do it, it felt weird not to.
not to do it. Yeah. You got body gets used to the activity. So then becomes like, kind of not, it's almost like the subconscious, like it's rolling like 95% of
Mm,
our stuff is coming from a subconscious mind.
sure.
And if you get yourself to kind of retrain the things to become like that, like it's like breathing, it's like eating, it's like something you just
Mm,
do, and it's not
exactly.
hard. So then it becomes part of your daily routines, like you're saying, it becomes like a habit.
Exactly.
But it's actually a routine. It's how they like it's like you're just like it's not something that you even think about doing. You just do it.
That's the whole point, right? Like that's the whole point of habits. You want to get to a point where it's not hard to go do the thing, right? And if you miss it, then it's easy to get back on because it feels more natural to do it than to not do it. That's the whole point of habits, you know? So that's kind of like my little story about like how I got to where I got to, but also that's the whole long haul start small thing. You have to be willing to start small if you're in it for the long haul. And so if you do the math, it took me 20 weeks, right? It took me 20 weeks to get to the point where I was running a mile every morning. But then after that, it was easy, right? It was just,
Yeah.
oh yeah, great. I'm the type of person who runs a mile every morning.
Yeah, it's like the little steps are the 1 degree wins. Um, like, if you just start, it's to me, it's like achievable goals. Um, and that's where, people, they bite off more than they can chew, because somebody starts talking about,
Mm,
musicians, like, I got to do this album. I'm going to
mm,
do like a tour. Well, maybe you should just do a song in one show, right? So, but if you go and think about it, like you got to do the whole album, like then you might not
sure,
start.
sure.
You
Well,
might
I
even
think,
go back to like, I just want to get a riff, not even
yeah,
the song. I just want to work on the
exactly.
riff.
Yeah, you have it exactly right. That's literally it. It's like what is like the smallest place that you can start. And again, I think that's going to be different for everyone, but that's the beauty of it, right? It's really easy to give advice and be like, "Oh, well, you need to start here, you need to start there." Ultimately, everyone is different, and for someone who maybe like has a lot of maybe they have like a lot of natural discipline, but maybe they're still struggling with habits, is like they might be like, "Oh, or like let's say somebody who's already somewhat athletic, right? For them, they might be like, oh, running a mile is easy. I want to run 5 miles. So they started
Mhm.
running a mile every morning, right?
Yeah.
Everyone's is going to look different. Some people might need to just go out and walk first. So yeah, it looks different for everyone. But I love when you mentioned the 1 degree wins. That's something else I talk about in the book as well. Is it's kind of similar to this the starting small thing, but it's slightly different in the sense that when you so if you were to get, on a plane in California and you were to point the nose in like 1 degree difference and you were to go in that direction, you would end up in a completely different place than you would have otherwise. And so the
Mhm.
idea is that like you have to give yourself permission to make these little changes, knowing that where you end up is going to be different. And this all comes down to that idea of like not beating yourself up for starting small, like knowing that like that is part of the process part of the process, but also in starting small, that is literally the key to getting you to where you want to go. That just making that tiny shift further down the road, you're going to be in a completely different place.
Yeah. I think it's a really important thing to do. It's also that people are like the perfection trap. Like I run into a lot of
Mm,
people who they spend all the time trying to get something. Like they'll stay doing like 100 takes on something, trying to get it, totally right. And my whole point is like there's no bad note, there's an opportunity, right?
mm,
So if you look at it like older compositions and like in the older days, people were more willing to deal with what we call the happy accident. So they might have had an idea of what they wanted to do, but like maybe the fifth take or something, it went somewhere they didn't. Oh, that's not what I want. But then
mm.
they were willing to say, "Hey, that's actually better than what I planned." And some people would just wipe it out. They go race the tape. And to me, the mindset that says, "Hey, maybe this is the way I should go," instead of racing the tape and trying to get it back to
Mm,
the thing that you were doing before, that wasn't feeling natural, feeling forced,
mm.
right? And the thing that came out of by an accident was like more true to where you really are.
Yeah.
But you don't see it, you don't believe it because it's like, oh. So this mindset of being able to deal with the vulnerability, deal with the unplanned event, the happy accident,
Hmm.
that can allow a lot of growth if you don't put it in the box.
Yeah, yeah. No, I would. That's exactly what I was thinking when you said that. Like, it reminds me of the conversation we are having before about like just putting things into a box or like being so focused on the outcome instead of being focused on the experience itself. Like, if in your life you were focused on having the experience as opposed to like getting a specific outcome, I feel like the quality of your life completely changes. Just like you said in that moment, it's like, oh, this is like a happy accident. Oh, that's interesting. That happened. Like, where could that lead? And just enjoying it instead of being like, well, that's not what it's supposed to be.
Well,
It's
that's
like,
what
who
scientists.
says what it's supposed to be?
Well, a lot of scientists and engineers sometimes they get an unexpected result and it's better than what their plan was.
Hmm.
And
Exactly.
we could be working on something. We say we get this unexpected outcome where we were able to do something that wasn't in the project plan. And the good organization that's nimble allows that to happen. the organization that's less nimble said, well, the manager comes in and is like, oh, that's not in the plan. We're not doing it. I'm like, but
Yeah.
it's like got a better result than what we were working on.
Mm.
No, it's not in the plan. We're not doing it. So then, like, that's what the organizations I walk away from. I go toward the
Yeah.
organizations that have a more nimble mindset. That if they do a lot more experimentation, they have a lot of what ifs,
Yeah.
and they like that, and they go with it, and they tend to go with it. To me, it's like the other people like the security of knowing that it's stuck to the plan. I feel like that doesn't give me any security at all.
Mm.
So I have a different mindset than the people who feel comfortable with that, and that's fine. That's where you are.
Sure.
But I think sometimes you have to think be a little less risk averse. But
Well, I think, what's interesting too is like in life, I think it's so funny. I feel like what you just described is like a really good like contrast between the two like approaches to life, where I feel like some people approach it as in like I trust the plan, and then there's other people who like I trust myself. And so like if I trust myself, then it doesn't matter what happens, right? No matter what happens, I know it's just we're gonna figure it out. Like we're gonna get through it, we're gonna do something. And the other people who trust the plan, when things don't go according to plan, then it's
yeah, they don't know what to do. Like it's
yeah,
like
everything's up in the air.
yeah, it's like when you're in a modal jazz band and somebody hits the wrong note, somebody else like evolves to the note, and the audience doesn't even know that they made a
Mm,
mistake.
yeah.
Versus a band that maybe like playing, like an example, you're playing a classical piece and you know what the notes are supposed to be. You hit the wrong note.
Gotcha.
Everybody knows you hit the wrong note.
Yeah.
Everybody knows you did it wrong. Everybody knows you made a mistake. But if you're in a place where it's like experimental jazz or fusion,
Yeah.
improvisational music, it's okay to be in that place.
Yeah. And
And
like, was it even a mistake?
it's not even a mistake. You just not, you don't play it like a mistake. You act like it's like that's the way it's supposed to. That's the way it goes.
And maybe that's was the way it was supposed to go. That's the
Yeah,
point, right? It's just
yeah,
like,
yeah.
oh,
Right.
interesting.
Yeah, you
Not
just
only did I
believe.
cover it up so people don't know, but it's like, hey, maybe that wasn't even a mistake.
Yeah, yeah. It's just the way we evolved. And
Yeah.
I've talked to actors. They've gotten scripts from the writer,
Mm,
and then when they go to do the scene, a really confident actor says, this character wouldn't say that, so they don't say it. They make something up, and then the
mm.
director and the writer are like, oh, that's actually better than what I wrote. But then you got some directors and writers, oh, that's not what I did. And then they want
Uh,
them to get rid of it, and the actor tends to go with the directors and writers that give them the latitude
that's interesting.
to do that. So then you'll see people who will go, they realize what kind of team they should be on. Because they know it's like I'm not going to be with this like team that's like so stuck to the original script. Is like
Hmm.
they're giving me. I'm an actor. What am I supposed to do? I'm supposed to feel it. I'm supposed to tell you like I don't think I studied this guy. I started putting myself in his shoes. He wouldn't do that, right? He would do this, and then you have to trust the person who knows their craft. The actor is giving you that's the implement. They implement your idea, and so when they tell you like maybe that doesn't work, maybe you should listen.
Yeah, that's super interesting.
But yeah, it's just weird. Like people get like I said, it's like lane shifting, and in a kind of like this hybrid world of if you take things from other lanes and kind of merge them together and experiment, the end result can be something that you didn't, no one expected it, but that's why life is exciting.
Mm,
Because if you knew everything that was supposed to happen, like, would you really want that life?
right. Like, what's the point of that?
Well, why would you want that?
It really is true. It's so funny because I think there's a part of each of us that like kind of fights for certainty. Like we want there to be certainty in our lives and we want to know what's going to happen next. But ultimately, like you said, if you did know what was going to happen next all the time, it's kind of like, well, then what's the point of what we're doing here? That is kind of the point.
Yeah, because like you're gonna know everything that happens to the end. Like it was like, whoa, I don't like that.
Yeah, actually, that's a great point though. Like you don't okay, that's a great point. It's like with movies, right? Like you can only rewatch the same movie so many times before you have to let a certain amount of time go by before you kind of forgot what happens, right?
Yeah, yeah, I forgot
Otherwise,
what
you're like,
happened.
why am I watching this? It'll be the same thing with life.
Yeah, it's not gonna it's not unless you just like being on in loops. See, some people like the loop.
Mm,
They have a lot of security in the loop,
sure.
and they like the reinforcement of the idea. They get like in this mantra, it's like, "Oh, I wanna see this over and over because it makes me happy. It makes me feel like, oh, I know what life's about."
Mm,
And so they wanna see that, and when things don't go that way, they get like, "Oh," like the blame game. It's like, it's the other's fault. It's this fault. It's
mm,
like to me, it's like there's a lot of personal responsibility where you are. Like a lot of times, they say, "Well, my boss stuck, put me in this situation." It's like, did he put you in a situation, or are you not willing to get out of the situation?
mm. Very true. Very true. Yeah, for me, I actually do really believe in that principle in general, in life, like personal responsibility, like you said, about like, yeah, I can, I mean, I could honestly probably talk about it for hours, but like, yeah, I've lived a life where I listened to what other people told me to do, and I was miserable about it.
Hmm.
And eventually, you take responsibility and you go, no, this isn't what I want. This is what I want to experience. And when you do, that's when you really feel fulfilled and when you feel happy.
Now, when you pivot into your podcast hat,
Sure.
how much of what's in your book and what you've been doing is like combined into your podcast?
Um, sometimes I talk about habits. It's just one of the many things I talk about. So in my podcast, it's called How to Be a Person. And so I called it that because well, first of all, I had an idea years ago to write a book called How to Be a Person. And I never wrote it. And eventually, I found out that my wife was pregnant with our first son, and she's still pregnant with our first son. She's going to be giving birth in a few months, and it finally was just like, you know what? I need to do this. And so I started the podcast with the name How to Be a Person, with also the intention of writing a book called How to Be a Person. And I really just want it to be kind of like open conversations about life. I ultimately, like, I want my see, here's what's funny. I never had kids, right? And so I was just
Mhm.
thinking about impacting other people. And now that I'm gonna have a kid, I'm like, oh, okay. Like, I want him to be able to look back and like listen to these conversations and like
Yeah.
know what life is about. And for me, like, some of the main things, like I mentioned to you before, is about purpose and potential. But I feel like there's this like base foundation of always being open, like being
Mhm.
open to new ideas and being open to being wrong. So
Yeah.
I've
It's the
on my
hard
podcast, I explore so many different topics. I have so many different types of people on, and I have a lot of different conversations. And also, this is not the only book I'm releasing. Right. So I have habit hacks. I told you I'm writing one called How to Be a Person. But I have probably 7 or 8 books in mind that I also want to write because, like I told you, I'm kind of like this like scientist of life. I've done all these
Yeah.
different things and all these different ideas. And so I just kind of like share what I learn. And so, yeah, if I happen to be talking about something about habits, yeah, it does tie in, but I talk about a lot of different things.
That's interesting because, like, there's a rule of thumb with some people in the podcasting space that you have to be very narrowly focused. And on, people have told me that since 2016, I've been a podcaster.
Yeah.
They say, "Oh, if you interview musicians, that's what you think should just be that." And I'm like, I decided it was about creativity, and creativity
Mm,
is not just limited to musicians.
sure.
Entrepreneurs, life coaches, people, shamans, like
Yeah,
every human being is creative. So I said, I'm
absolutely.
going to weave the idea of creativity into everything, which allows
I
me to
love
have a
that.
very broad, space.
I love
Which,
that.
and it's counterintuitive to like the people who try to like pitch things, management people, marketing people.
Mm,
They like to have certain things that they can control, and that's their mindset. And I understand what they're trying to do.
yeah.
But I feel like if I just show up and I show that I have this broad community that I can include a lot of people,
Mhm.
then people don't know, they have an idea of what to expect, that we're going to talk about human creativity and like the reason why humans, to me, are always going to be in the driver's seat, not AI is not going to be in the driver's seat,
Mm,
is because of creativity.
interesting.
And that's a theme that we can talk about with anybody.
Yeah.
Um, And so I think that that's like in line with kind of with where you are is like expansive, open-ended. Like, why not? What's wrong with that? That's kind of what we are.
Exactly. So yeah, it's so funny. It goes back to that same theme we've been talking about of being put into a box. I think ultimately, like, we're not meant to be put into a box. I think all of us have a lot of potential in a lot of different areas, and our whole point of being here is just to like explore it. Go have fun, like follow what you feel and follow what like makes you excited and lights a fire in you. Go do those things and like, yeah, man, you have a good life.
Well, the permission structure, the first one that has to give you, it's not your, your parents are kind of like the first people to give you permission because you're a kid
Mm,
and you can't do stuff by yourself. But then a lot of times in life, you still keep that frame.
like
Because
you need permission from someone else. Yeah.
grandpa said
So
it,
true.
grandma said it, pop said it, mom said it. That's what I have to do. And then it's not really life changing when you say, well, maybe I don't have to do what grandpa said, right?
Maybe I don't need permission to do what
Yeah,
I feel like
maybe like
doing.
I don't want to be a farmer.
Yeah.
Maybe I don't want to be an attorney. The whole family's been attorneys and doctors, but like I want to be violinist. Like I want to go be an actor. Like everybody's like, well, we don't do that. Joneses don't do that. It's like, well, maybe this Jones does.
Uh,
You know, because that's a hard place to be because then you're not going to get a lot of support from your like inner microcosm. You're like, and you're going out into the macrocosm and you don't have support in the microcosm of your like family structure doesn't
mhm,
support what you want to do. And that's a hard place to be
mhm.
because
Oh,
that's
for
where you
sure.
get a lot of foundational structure. But like, I believe you still can push it. And there's a lot of examples of people who were super famous that did push it. There's
Mm,
nobody in their line that did what they did.
yeah.
Like, they're the first one.
Yeah.
And so that doesn't mean you can't do it. It's hard, but you can do anything you want to do. It's like it's a mindset is everything.
Yeah. Yeah, I think for I think it's important for people to know, like, I don't think you should do something different for the sake of doing something different, but I think you should do what you feel compelled to do, even if it's different. That's
Mhm.
to me is like whatever it is that you feel like doing, like you should just go do that thing.
Yeah, yeah, you
Like,
just
just go
do
do
it.
it.
Yeah, you just not to be like rebel without a cause.
Yeah,
Like, I'm
yeah.
gonna say, 'cause like, what are you going against? Well, what's up? What's up? I think there was something like I think there was a famous movie where Humphrey, no, what's his name? Yeah, there's a famous movie where somebody is like, "What do you rebel against? What's on the list?" It's something like that. It's like I don't know. It's like I'm just gonna
Mm,
rebel against anything, just to be a
uh,
rebel.
yeah,
That's well, I guess if you want to do that, you could do it.
yeah.
Um,
See, so this is kind of my perspective. Like, so my like I told you, my wife is pregnant with our first kid. It's going to be a boy, and what I ultimately want for him is to not experience that like being put into a box thing. So like just like you said, where like you go to school, you're told like what you're supposed to do. You need permission to do anything, like even like normal bodily functions of using the bathroom. You have to ask someone if you can do that,
yeah,
which is insane to me, right?
yeah,
I think about it now and I'm like, that's completely insane.
yeah,
Like they like here I'm getting all upset. I'm not mad. I'm just passionate.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
it,
I
it
get it.
really is just it's one of those things where like you don't realize it and then when you do realize it, you see it everywhere. You're like, oh my gosh, like literally from the time you're a kid, you are taught to question yourself constantly. You always have to ask someone else for permission, even when your body is telling you you need to do this thing. You still have to get permission from an outside source in order to do it. And so for me, it's like, I don't want my kid to grow up that way. Like, I want him to do what he feels compelled to do and like realize that there are no limits because there really aren't. Like, and there are
Mhm.
people who prove that over and over again.
Yeah,
And everyone looks to them and goes, wow, that's amazing. Right. But when it's someone in your circle, you're like, stay in your lane, do what you're supposed to do. And you're like, bro, we need more people on this planet doing what lights a fire in them, right? What
yeah.
they feel compelled to do, not what they're supposed to do. So for me, that's kind of like my goal, is to
Well,
like
that is
not
like,
put those restraints on them.
yeah. I mean, because the future of humanity is dependent on how many people are actually, self-actualize
Oh, I
and give
totally
give
agree with
give
that.
us the solutions. Because if the solutions are all tamped down,
Yes.
then like we're not going to get to where we need to be.
Yeah.
And
Everything we have right now is because of people here, one person there who was like, I'm doing it, right? And they
Yeah,
went and just like pushed for it.
push
And like
forward.
that's how we got to where we are. That's how we have electricity. That's how you and I are talking, from I don't even remember where you said you are now, like right across
New
the
Hampshire,
country.
yeah.
And you
Yeah,
know what
it's
I'm saying?
people ideas that you could have this thing that, that's the internet. It was like, Defense Department project. And
Yeah.
it's like, well, should that be given to the public? Well, there was a lot argument of whether or not it should be. And then
So funny.
it's like when you take something and you think, well, it should just stay here because it gives me an advantage.
Mm,
And I can understand the generals and people would say, well, that's an advantage, right? But then look what it's done for commerce and GDP,
so true.
and that's an advantage.
Yeah,
Right?
absolutely.
So if you get your GDP up to a certain level, that's actually a strategic advantage.
Mm,
So that's where people get like stuck in the mind, they would think it's like, oh, we've got this technical advantage, we'll keep it here. And you saw that with like NASA. I mean, tons of stuff that NASA did in the 60s and 70s embedded in everything we do today
mm,
with the computer development and stuff that was done was kind of, so, well, why should we do that? Why should we? It's like when you go and push things to be able to go to Mars or put a colony on the moon, that tech bleeds down into everything and then gets stuff to
mm,
happen here. It's like people get so, well, it's only going to happen there. No, it's the process of getting there that develops things that we can actually use here.
mm.
And people get so narrow minded. I don't want to spend it on that. And I understand because they're looking at today. They're looking at, but
Yeah.
like, you got to look at like a wider space, and people kind
Yeah.
of don't open the frame. They don't open their
Mm,
eyes.
yeah.
They only see what's in front of them. They don't see like the future state of what could happen.
It's so see, it's hard to not have to focus on just surviving. I think that is one of like the big things that keeps people from reaching their potentials because they're so focused on just surviving their day to day that they don't have an opportunity to think about like
Yeah,
their
it's hard if you're
their
just trying to get a
potential.
piece of bread.
Yeah.
If you're trying to get a drink of drinkable water, I can
Yeah.
see why you might not have that frame.
Yeah, yeah. But I will say too, I think here's what I will say. I think most people in the United States especially have it better than like 99% of the rest of the world, okay?
Yeah.
And I do believe, and this is from my own experience, I'm not saying that I haven't done this too, but I believe a lot of us are in tight spots or have been in tight spots because of our own decision making, right? No one
Mhm.
put it on us to go rack
Yeah.
up the credit card or go even to have a cell phone bill or to have a car payment. Like no one's making you do any of that stuff. Like that's
Yeah.
100% a choice. And even the house you live in, right? It's like, oh, it's so expensive to live. Okay, well, live somewhere cheaper. Live somewhere smaller. Like make a
Yeah.
choice.
Yeah,
Take
yeah,
responsibility.
yeah, you can if you decide that I want to do self-development, well, maybe you don't have a McMansion. You put the money into getting a master's degree or whatever degree you need, and
Exactly.
then eventually you will get there. But
Yes.
if you want to have that comfort now, well, the reason why you don't have these things because you didn't do enough self-development.
Yeah. Well,
You did
and you
more.
decided, oh, I would rather just get by and have all of these comforts right now as opposed to prioritizing what I want long term. And this is not a judgment, just to be clear.
Yeah,
I don't
yeah.
think anyone like I've been in that situation. I've put myself in that situation before.
Mhm.
But I do think it's important that people realize like because it's so funny. Like on social media, people complain all the time, right? About
Mhm.
like the cost of living, about like how, just like I was saying, like it's all we can do is focus on like just getting by. And you're like, bro, we live in the United States. Like it is amazing here. Like it is genuinely amazing. Like if you've never gone to like another country where things are not as amazing, like you don't realize it, but it is literally amazing here. And all you have to do is be willing to prioritize what you want. So yes, if you want to just have like this baseline, like I make just enough to live, but I live a pretty comfortable life, you can do that here. But
Mhm.
if you want to reach your potential, like that is also like more possible here than it is anywhere. But
Yeah.
you have to be able to prioritize until you get to the point where you can afford all the things. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think this people have to have a certain level of I don't know, planning or discipline or forward thinking, like not to just think about today.
Sure.
Like, and in the US, we do have the luxury of that you don't have to just think about today. You
Mm,
could be focused on just today, but you could be thinking about like, where am I going to be 5 years, 10 years, 15 years down the line? How could I get to this place?
Yes.
And you can refocus and actually start to develop good habits. And that's what we talking about, habit hacks. We were
Yeah.
talking about your website, and both of these things have some similar paths in terms of what you're trying to get people to understand. Is like, you can be the person you want to be. You don't have to be
Exactly.
stuck on your programming.
Yeah. You can
You
have the
can
life you want to have. It's
you
all
can
possible.
reprogram it. Yeah, and
It's all right there too. That's the part that's crazy. Like, I mean, I can say this from my own experience too. It's nuts. Like, it's literally all right there. Like, you just have to be willing to like open your mind to it and not believe that you're 100% right all the time.
yeah. Well, that's the thing. It's hard to have that looking glass self and say,
Mm.
"Hey, you know what, Mr. Jones, you're wrong." You're like, maybe you need to like understand, like, doing this keeps on getting you this. If you do that, maybe you'll get that. So
Hmm.
maybe you need to like stop doing the same thing and get expecting a different result. It's like
Yeah,
that,
absolutely.
that that's like that's a core thing. It's hard to do because then you got to admit, oh, I was doing something wrong, or I wasn't
Yeah.
doing it the way that I needed to do it to get the result
Mm.
that I wanted.
That's exactly. So when we were talking before about taking responsibility, like and having personal responsibility, that is the hardest part about it, is because once you take responsibility, you have to admit that every part of your life right now is because of a decision you made in the past. And that's tough to do because it's like most people want to blame someone else for their situation. Like, oh, my parents this or the government that or whatever it might be. And it's easy to do that. It feels good to do that because you don't have to be the one in charge. It's not your fault when something
Mhm.
goes wrong. But if you are willing to take responsibility, then you go, okay, yep, everything about my life is because of a decision I made up until now. And but the beauty of that is, yes, you have to you're the one who carries the responsibility for everything that happened, but it also means you get to change it. It means that you go, oh, okay. So if I just want it different, I just have to do something different. Exactly. That's
Yeah.
it.
Well, I think we'll end there on a
Sure.
Saturday morning in the U.S. Eastern Standard Time where I am. But yeah, I think that's our bottom line of our conversation, is like, you have the ability to reframe where you are,
Yeah.
and where you're going to be. You can't fix that what you did in the past. That past is the past, but you can deal with the present and the future, and I think that's important. And I want to thank you for being a guest on the Family Electric Ghost podcast. And we
Yeah.
got the URL for your podcast. And I believe, like, if people click on that, do they find other things? Can they get to your book from
Yeah.
there?
Everything is there. The links to my podcast, links to my book. I have a course as well. Like everything is there.
Cool. Yeah, and that's fully clickable. We're just live on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. We'll be on other major podcast platforms like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Video Podcast, iHeartRadio by the end of the day. I want to thank you for being on the show again.
Thanks for having me, Phantom. I appreciate it.
Thank you.